morning. I'm Sarah Isett, and I am excited to talk with David, the CEO of Azure Standard, about healthy soil. And I would like to get from your vast experience of growing Azure and being a farmer, just to talk about the biology of soil.
It's a subject that is probably one of the most foundational to life on Earth. All life comes from the soil, and all healthy life comes from healthy soil. And in order to have healthy plants, there's a symbiotic relationship between life in the soil and all life that grows on top of the soil. And of course, all animal life, including human life, is derived from the nutrients that come from the soil. So in a handful of healthy soil like we have here, if I take a handful of this nice healthy garden dirt, there's more microbes in this handful of dirt than there are humans on Earth. You smell the life in this soil. All of the life that's in that soil, it lives in the soil to be able to break down the nutrients that comes from rock, from other organic matter, and it breaks it down to a usable form so that the living plants can use that material, whether it's other dead plants from previous generations, or it's the rock that came from a volcano or sediment or wherever that soil was developed from. So in order for a plant to use a nutrient, it has to be colloidal in some form. It has to be able to be absorbed by water. And any nutrient that can be absorbed by water, it either has to be very artificial, which is in a conventional world, they typically use four nutrients, N, P, and K, and they can get those in through a chemical process to be able to be absorbed in a colloidal format. But in nature, nothing is in a colloidal format except it comes through microbial action. It comes through the little microbes. There's obviously the vast majority of microbes is the bacteria that's in the soil. Then we also have the protozoa and the nematodes, which are very essential in that life cycle. Those are the ones that aerate the soil. They make the soil so that the bacteria can thrive. The bacteria are what colonizes to break down the nutrients in the soil. Obviously, we also have a fungal element. There's certain healthy funguses that grow in the soil, mycorrhiza obvious being the one that people are most aware of. But that fungus also begins to tie all those bacterial colonies together. The fungus actually is all interconnected. It creates a great big web in the soil.
That helps with water retention and keeping the mycorrhiza does as well.
Absolutely. The mycorrhiza helps to retain the water. It also allows the water to distribute itself. So instead of one hugely wet spot, it will actually move out throughout the soil. So here's some samples of soil that is not quite as healthy. So here is some soil that, well, obviously it's very clayey, and this soil actually could be by getting more bacterial life and more organic matter. This soil could actually be resurrected. This is some pretty typical garden soil with very low organic matter. There's very little life in this soil because there's nothing for the bacteria to eat. And the bacteria have to eat the organic matter. Well, of course, bacteria also primarily have to eat sugar. We'll get into that just in a minute.
Which is, and the organic matter helps with aeration, which helps life.
Well, it helps with aeration, but it also gives the microbes something to eat.
Right.
They have something to break down.
Right.
Here's another one. This is just almost pure clay. There's no substance to that. You might make adobe bricks out of that more. Here is some other very low organic matter soils. So these soils here have very low organic matter, and this is quite sandy here. So this is going to be something that would be more like what you would get out of a river bottom where it washed washed in. It washed all the good, healthy organic matter out of it, and all you have left is blow sand pretty much with a little bit of silt mixed in. Now this is a really interesting sample here. Here is a forest floor sample. And so we have right on the surface, so this is a forest that developed into some fairly poor soils. So down here you've got fairly poor soil and fairly low organic matter. So this is probably definitely second growth, if not third or fourth growth forest. So you've got fairly low organic matter, but it is decent soil. It can be rebuilt. Now we have here, you can look through the layers of the soil. Here's where the bacteria, so this is when the trees begin to start dropping their needles or leaves and the grass begin to grow. So you have a change in color right here. This change in color is a part of the bacteria growing in that soil. Here's your bacterial zone. So in this particular soil, you only have about 2 inches that the bacteria are actually thriving in. There's probably bacteria deeper, but primarily you only have a 2-inch thrive zone. This is where, and then this top layer right here is almost completely bacterial. It's decaying organic matter. This is organic matter that's fallen on the forest floor and began to decay. And if you can notice, this is really tight, hard soil. This is very loose.
Very hard to come apart.
See, this is loose and soft and very easy for the plants to take hold and thrive in this soil, and very easy for the bacteria to get water and oxygen. Bacteria, healthy bacteria for healthy soil needs oxygen.
So for customers that are listening today, what kind of things would they do with this type of a soil to get started, to get some healthy organic matter into soil that has a lot of clay or sand? What's some good suggestions for that?
Well, obviously, the very first thing that you would do to restore a clay or very poor organic matter soil is to get some humus content in that soil. So the very first thing you're going to want to do is put some kind of organic matter on, be it compost or mulch or even
grass clippings maybe, or leaves?
You bet. Grass clippings break down very quickly. They're green. You do have to watch for mildews in grass clippings if they were from conventional lawns, because sometimes you will get chemicals.
Right.
Weed and feed will actually kill plants in the garden after you put the clippings on, so be very careful with conventional 2,4-Ds on the putting that directly into your soil.
Okay.
But this, so that's the first step. Then the next step is you got to get something growing in it. Soil does not like to grow nothing. It loves to grow things. And the more that's growing in it, the better. So if you'll notice in this soil here, when we just replanted these tomatoes a month or so ago, and in the meantime, we don't want these beds growing nothing. So there's carrots in here. So we have carrots mixed in the tomatoes, so these carrots will come out before these tomatoes get very big. You have to keep your soil growing things. Soil does not like to be fallow. It doesn't like to grow nothing. It'll try to grow something. Weeds.
Yep.
Yep. Now let's get into the topic of feeding those bacteria. Bacteria in the soil have to have sugar to have energy to break down anything in the soil. Sugar is the foundation of breaking down the nutrient, or feeding the bacteria to have the energy to break down the nutrients. Sugars actually get into the soil a couple of ways, but primarily only photosynthesis can create sugars. These green leaves on this plant, or this little one down here, or also the little algae that grow in the soil, and many of the soils have little layers of algae on the top of the soil, including this forest right here has the little layer of algae right on the soil surface. That layer of algae creates a photosynthetic action and begins to put sugars back in the soil. So a healthy plant like this plant would take and creates sugar through its photosynthetic action. It puts that into the plant. And that sugar in a healthy plant is broke up about 4 different directions. It uses about a quarter of the sugar to actually grow the plant itself, to grow the structure. That's what it uses for energy to grow. It uses about a quarter of the plant for the root system to pull the nutrients from the soil and anchor the plant. It uses about a quarter of it to bear fruit, so you have little blossoms on here, and that eventually will be big tomatoes. And it uses and that's where the sugar comes from, why those tomatoes taste a little sweet.
Right.
Because you have some healthy sugars in a tomato. And about a quarter of it goes into the root system and is released from the root system into the soil. And that sugar that's released into the soil then feeds those bacteria that break down
For the next generation.
For the next
Yeah.
generation.
That's
And
great.
it's a very normal cycle that if we don't mess it up with chemicals or imbalances, it works beautifully. And nature regenerates itself over and over and over again. It was a beautiful system that was created in the soil.
So what about cover crops to create a healthy biological life in the soil?
And cover crops are awesome to help create wonderful nutrients. Again, the land does not like to be barren. It likes to grow something. It likes to grow abundant life all the time. And so when you're looking at cover crops, obviously the winter is a great time to grow cover crops. Most of the country has enough heat and light before you can really get a garden in. You're going to grow some cold weather cover crops. Something like rye or ryegrass is a really good choice.
For winter time.
For winter time.
Okay.
In the summertime, there's a few really good choices. For a really quick turnaround, buckwheat grows really fast. It's very, very tender, and it breaks down really, really fast at a high humus level.
And it's very beautiful too.
It's
Bees
pretty.
are, yeah.
Bees like
Yeah.
it. Yeah, it's really nice. And then don't underestimate legumes. If you have a little longer stretch of summer weather, especially clovers, alfalfas, anything that's a legume, it has a special symbiotic relationship with bacteria. There's a special bacteria in the root of a legume that actually takes nitrogen from the air, because remember, our air, it's a large percentage of the air we breathe is actually nitrogen. Nitrogen is a growth regulator of a plant, but nitrogen from the air is not available to a plant because it's chemical, it's not colloidal, it can't be used by a plant until it's been broken down by a microbe. So a legume has a special relationship with a microbe that actually attaches to its root system, and it feeds it sugar all the time, and it pulls nitrogen from the air and affixates it to the root of the plant. There's little tiny nodules that actually grow on a legume that, and maybe this one actually would have it. Here, this is a legume. They're little tiny, they're really small. Right here is one.
Okay.
There's a
so
little
we can
tiny
show that.
nodule right there that actually affixates to the root of this legume, and it's pure nitrogen. And that nitrogen can be used by that plant, and it also actually even creates excess. So when you cover crop, you till that cover crop in, then that nitrogen becomes readily available to the next crop. So it's a great way to get your garden boosted the next
that's
time around.
Great. And they also have very deep roots, right? Is that
Well, depending which kind of legume. This one doesn't. This is a creeping clover, and that has a very shallow root system, just in the but something like an alfalfa or a lupine has a very deep root system. Alfalfa has been known to go 25 to 30 feet deep in soils that are
crazy?
and it'll pull up nutrients from very, very deep, and water and so on. But most of remember, the air has to get into the soil, so it can't fix nitrogen 20 feet deep. It affixates the nitrogen more towards the surface of the soil, because that's where the air can get into the soil. And that's one of the importance of of worms in the soil too, is they create little holes in the soil and it pulls oxygen
Yeah, right.
and nitrogen down into the soil. It pulls air into the soil, makes those microbes thrive. Remember, healthy microbes are aerobic. They need oxygen. There are anaerobic bacteria as well. Anaerobic bacteria creates things like methane, but that's not what you want in your
No.
soil. You want aerobic bacteria.
Right.
You want oxygen-using bacteria.
What can you do to create a healthy plant and healthy fruit with high sugars that you were talking about before?
So the primary thing to create healthy plants is to give a great balance of all the minerals that that plant needs to be in balance. Now, even more important than the plant is us, or the animal that eats that plant. We need what is known to man right now. We need at least 72 minerals to create optimum health. There may be more than that, but that's what science tells us right now. That number's been going up in recent years. So in a typical conventional agriculture scene, they only usually look at 4, maybe N, P, and K, sometimes only 3.
Yeah.
And then, calcium maybe and boron, but that'll be about it. After that, all the rest of the nutrients, and a lot of grain farmers, all they look is nitrogen. It's about all they look at.
Yeah.
Just the growth
Good
regulator.
boost. Yep.
They want to boost growth.
Yep.
They don't really people aren't selling healthy food, they're selling quantity. And that's kind of where we've gone wrong, is we should be selling the nutrient content of the food and not the quantity. It's not about pounds, it's about what's in that food. So to create healthy soil, you need to balance the minerals in the soil, and really the bacteria that's in the soil does an awesome job at that. But you can test the soil, you also can test the plant leaves. You can also, by looking at the plants, you can tell if there's deficiencies in various nutrients in the soil. We test our plant leaves during the height of the growing season, usually every week,
Right.
to see if anything is a little bit out of balance, and we do foliar applications of nutrients and minerals to bring that into balance. However, if you're doing a garden and you don't have the time and energy or money to do testing, just by looking at it, hey, what's the color like? Do we have a nice green leaf, or is it paling out? Do we have little, do we have a very small, thin stem? Is it too thin for
fruiting and green? I have a lot of questions about that too, where you have a lot of extra blossoms or a lot of extra growth and no blossoms. That's another thing to check for.
Right. So too many blossoms and not enough growth typically is a nitrogen deficiency, or your pH is way too alkali. So a more acidic pH is going to create a little bit more growth, a little more alkali pH, and pH can be adjusted. A lot of the pH is adjusted through calcium. So,
But you need your calcium and magnesium.
That's right.
In
So
balance.
your calcium, magnesium, the ratio in the soil, it's just almost identical to the ratios needed in the human body. Calcium, magnesium ratios of 11:1 is really important in the human body. It's exactly the same in the soil. It's exactly what the soil needs as well. You need 11 parts of calcium to 1 part of magnesium. And here at this particular spot on Azure Farm, naturally the soil was quite high in magnesium. The calcium levels were good, but the magnesium levels were too high.
Right.
So the right way to deal with that is actually, you can't deduct magnesium, it's already in the soil. So you actually have to raise your calcium levels even
To
higher
make them balance. Okay.
to create that balance. That way your plant can uptake that in the right balance, and you get the healthier plant. You get a stalk that's thick enough that it's not just going to bust. Calcium is absolutely essential in the growth of a plant, just like it is in the growth of people. If we don't have sufficient calcium, we have weak bones, there's broken bones, there's rickets, there's all these things that happen. If you get that in balance, and if you're eating healthy food from healthy soil, if we balance it in the soil, we'll
Then
get
we
it.
have it already.
We have it
Yeah.
balanced in our body. We don't need to worry about it. But when we don't have it balanced in the soil, then we have to watch it in our bodies, because we're eating out of balance product, and then we need to
compensate and eat
Take
pills.
calcium pills or something, and I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that. It certainly helps. But how much better if we can if we can balance that in the soil and we just put things, I mean, we can put things like ground limestone or gypsum, which is a calcium sulfate. It's basically little seashells you're grinding up seashells into powder and putting them on the soil. It's very, very benign. It's what it's what the soil would naturally get if you had the proper animal and plant balance. Obviously, in modern agriculture, we don't necessarily have all the animals that you would have in a mob grazing situation.
Right, so you have to actually add everything.
So you're adding a few of those elements back in from that side.
Okay.
But remember, it's organic agriculture. It's through the microbes that we get all 72 minerals up into our plant. Conventional agriculture really only focuses on 3 to 5, 3 primarily, up to 5. Our health, and especially nitrogen, doesn't usually help human health at all.